Hello everyone, Mason here. How you doing? Today it's time for a book review. By now it's a story I'm sure we're all familiar with. A group of teenagers make their way to an isolated location, intent on having a good night, letting loose, partying away from the prying eyes of their parents. But then, disaster strikes. The flash of steel, the splatter of blood. One by one the friends begin to die, and when the night is over, only one girl is left standing. For Quincy Carpenter, what happens that night at Pine Cottage is her induction into an exclusive club that nobody would ever want to be a part of. 3 women, 3 survivors, that the media dubs the final girls. Quincy wants no part of it, refuses to allow her life to be defined by that one night, and although she's inextricably linked to Lisa Milner and Samantha Boyd, the 3 of them never meet. 10 years later, Quincy has the life that she wants. A nice apartment, a loving boyfriend, a baking blog. She's doing great, but not for long. When Lisa Milner dies, and the elusive Samantha Boyd shows up on Quincy's doorstep, seemingly intent on dredging up the past and helping her to recover her repressed memories of the worst night of her life, things start to spiral out of control. Quincy better get ready, because the truth is about to come out, and what was started that night at Pine Cottage might not be finished. Today's book review is Final Girls by Riley Sager. The first thing that I want to make clear is that despite the fact I think it's far from perfect, I actually enjoyed Final Girls quite a lot. This is my second Riley Sager book, and I'm on a bit of a slasher kick right now, having watched both Amazon's I Know What You Did Last Summer for the first time, and Netflix's Scream again. So this felt like the perfect time to dive into this one. What you need to understand though is that Final Girls is a bit of a misleading title. Is it perfect contextually? Yeah, but it might lead to some false expectations and disappointment, because if you pick this one up expecting a traditional slasher, you're not gonna get it. The narrative is split between past and present, and although we do get to see what happened at Pine Cottage bit by bit, for the most part, Final Girls is about the aftermath of a slasher. What happens when the credits roll? What is the rest of the Final Girl's life like, and what effect will having lived through those events have on her? Quincy is an interesting, if not entirely likeable character. The way that she deals with what she went through is to just not think or talk about it at all. There's an insistence that she's moved on, to rise above what happened. She refuses to be defined by it and is, in her own words and the words of her boyfriend, more than just a victim, whatever that means. At the beginning of the story, she really does seem to be happy, like she's got her life sorted, but it quickly becomes clear that she's somewhat in denial and has issues that she just hasn't faced up to. Understandably, she's actually quite happy that she repressed her memories of what happened at Pine Cottage. She thinks she knows the outcome of the night, so the little details don't matter. She's also addicted to Xanax and some other issues that I can't go into right now. I can't say that I entirely agree with all the decisions that Quincy makes, but for the most part they are understandable, especially when she's being pushed and prompted by certain elements of the plot. Something that I wanted to touch on is that Quincy refuses to speak the name of the man that killed her friends because she doesn't believe that he deserves a name anymore, and I quite liked that. Too often we remember the name of the murderer, but we don't remember the names of their victims. I could rattle off 3 or 4 famous murderers, and you would know their names just as well as I do. But I couldn't tell you any of the names of their victims, and unless you're a bit of an expert on the subject, I don't think you could tell me either. Quincy's outlook really got me thinking. Now obviously from a historical standpoint, the facts need to be out there, and the reality is these killers can't remain anonymous. But considering how many mass murderers and serial killers desire notoriety and fame, do they really deserve to keep their names, to get that recognition? They most certainly don't deserve a chilling serial killer nickname, that's for sure. I'm intrigued though, and this isn't a rhetorical question. If we don't name the killer, are we giving them more or less power? Are we admitting that they are frightening? Turning them into something more than just a regular human being? Or are we robbing them of the privilege and recognition that they desire? Either way, in the future I think it's important that we try to focus on the lives that were taken, rather than the people who took them. Now whether or not Riley Sager was intending for me to think about that, I don't know, but it was an interesting element to the plot that got me thinking. Just like when I read Lock Every Door, I think that Sager did a fantastic job of getting me hooked and keeping me dangling on the string. I'm just not one of those people like Lee who can sit back and let the story unfold. My mind is constantly racing, trying to get ahead of the twists and work out what's going on so that I can get the satisfaction out of feeling like the author didn't outsmart me. Unfortunately, it seems that Sager is more than capable of turning me into a puppet that just dances to his tune. There's so many red herrings and false clues. Every time I thought I was being super clever, it turned out to just be Sager leading me up the garden path. I think that it's fair to say in both Final Girls and Lock Every Door, Sager doesn't necessarily go for the outlandish twist that just comes out of nowhere that you could never see coming. It's perfectly possible to work out what's gonna happen. Whilst Lee made an early prediction and ended up being right, I was too busy playing pseudo-detective, jumping around from theory to theory to notice what was right under my nose. There's at least one plot twist I can think of that I was kicking myself for not noticing. It was right there, so obvious, but I was too busy trying to be clever to realise it. Obviously, Lock Every Door is a bit of a different story. Whilst one of the twists in that is definitely guessable, the other one, the major one, is not. When it comes to Final Girls though, I think that most people will definitely be capable of putting everything together and working it out before the big reveal happens. I like that though. It's nice that from what I've seen, Sager isn't going to just write a plot twist that doesn't make sense for the sake of it. He doesn't rely too much on shock value. Even though that might mean that the eventual reveal is sort of obvious, the enjoyment comes from the ride. By the time you get to the destination, you've had so much fun trying to guess what's going to happen that you don't mind it's a bit obvious. In fact, it feels sort of satisfying. I like that you might think that you know the truth, and you might even be right about that, but Sager does enough to make you doubt yourself, and that's fun. On the other hand, even though Final Girls is an enjoyable ride, once it's over, it's best not to think too hard about what just happened. There's at least 3 plot holes I can think of that just don't make that much sense to me, and whilst they're not big enough to break the whole thing apart, they might bother some people more than they bothered me. The writing isn't always perfect either. There's definitely some strange metaphors and clunky phrasing that I couldn't help but laugh at throughout the story. The biggest flaw that I can think of is the characterizations though, particularly those of Quincy's friends in the past. On one hand, normally I'm not a massive fan of the narrative split between past and present because usually I find that one ends up being more interesting than the other. However, this time around I did feel that Sager did a pretty decent job of it, with good consistent pacing that never seems to slow down and made the plot feel like it was just zipping by, and enough interesting elements in both timelines to keep me intrigued. Unfortunately, all the chapters that take place during the night of the murders at Pine Cottage are all pretty short, basically just snippets that are over quite quickly. Because of that, I didn't feel like I had enough time to form any sort of connection to Quincy's friends. Even though those chapters are interesting, I felt quite detached, never felt like I was there in the moment, and because of that lack of connection, there wasn't any emotional punch or the intensity that there could have been otherwise. Another small complaint that I have is that this does what a lot of thrillers do, where they really pick up the pace in the last 45 minutes or so, which means that they have to reach the climax, do the big reveal, do the conclusion, and wrap everything up so quickly that it feels a bit jarring and rushed. Overall though, I had a pretty good time with Final Girls. It might not be one of the best books I've read this year, and it might not be one that I'm ever desperate to go back to, but I'm definitely glad that I read it, and I would definitely recommend it. Having said that, I'm not sure whether I recommend the Audible version. Stephanie Cannon is the narrator, and whilst I think she's alright, I don't necessarily think that she suits the character, and her voice is strange and unique. It might not be for everyone. I'm not gonna lie, the way that she pronunciates certain words and phrases really does bother me though, like the way she says minuscule. I don't know whether or not I'll be able to, because I don't know if they're too long, but if they're not, I will post the notes I made whilst reading in the description. If you've already read Final Girls and you want to talk spoilers, I'll also leave a pinned comment that we can use as a spoiler thread. My question for today is this: have you ever had a weird, funny, or frightening recurring dream? When I was younger, I used to have a lot of nightmares about the Nazgul chasing me, which is pretty funny to look back on now. These days, when I have a nightmare, it tends to be that I've been kidnapped or held somewhere and I'm desperately trying to get home. Being stung by wasps, that's quite a common one actually. If you've enjoyed this video, the like and subscribe buttons are just sitting there, waiting to be pressed. Now press them, or I'll throw a boomerang at your kneecaps. If you want to get in touch, say hi and have a chat, you know where the comment section is, and the link to my Twitter can be found in the description. Thanks ever so much for spending time with me today guys. Until next time, take care. For now I'm off, and you should have a good one.